Good morning again, Rinpoche. Tashidale. Thank you so much for these precious teachings. And Katrina, thank you for translating. Welcome to everybody online. A couple of announcements. Next week, the teaching will be on Tuesday instead of Monday. There's just a conflict with TBLC, so we'll switch to Tuesday. And then we have one class after that, the 25th, I believe. So we have 2 weeks left in this series of teachings with Geshe, and he plans to resume the teachings in December. In the meantime, you'll find information in the chat box about how to make an offering of gratitude for these precious teachings from Geshe and Katrina's translation and the Abbey for hosting. So you'll find that in the chat box, and we'll begin with some prayers.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one that's gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor of the world's supreme guide of being to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When of supreme among humans you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, fate like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, through the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, can you go so? Oh, Sanjay Sumde, do Chashiro Balero. Sisum Meta, don't get in the Ross. Sibakam Sum Sera. Dungam sungam sumi kam sumsita, the sumado yomaro koenelia. Dungam sitin debe, mida, nyawaita tundu mida, dolari tutu siwara. Dungam te. Sungam de samde tambu niwa sumba shibala soba. Samde jingwi shi tu tsane, shineda ladung tuk samde jingwi shi tu ne. Ni rangi oti, tingzi komnia kikuyara, sungam kiyatir. Sungmi stu sungmi ngui shiyang komne. Ya kikuya, oti kam sungyora, dungam sungam sungmi kas. Oti samma tamjegi, nedan ludan longchula soba samma te, sungmi ta, dungi tindang ras. Luburto ko chin jong yore ne luburto yang jingdo esre songora takba temba menjuro ngo ne yo mares sesum meta to get in the gas o tinga zo semle nam june shago yora so so ne lu lojula so bakari ne pesum so bakari ne tewe chuchen yin sam tento denge chi men sam o ti tengu yora ti ni chima ni tent pa chue ne go trendo na simle shibu ngamda tati chama leso treso sa ngamda chimbu tengu amara o ya o ti chilamna sisum beta to get tendandas.
So, here to begin with, as the Buddha has stated in a sutra, sometimes translated as the Extensive Cosmic Sport Sutra, the three worlds or the three realms of samsara are impermanent as autumn clouds. So that's the first line of this verse. And really, the three realms of samsara are exhaustive of all places within samsara. We have the desire, the material, and the immaterial realms. And so the desire realm contains all of the beings like hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, and gods. And the material realm contains those four concentrations, 1 through 4, the first, second, third, and fourth, that are attained by people who have attained those actual concentrations through developing a union of calm abiding and special insight. And then there are the more subtle levels of the immaterial realm and the various kinds of concentrations that are achieved there. And so all of this within the three realms of samsara, the abodes, the bodies, the enjoyments, are things that are impermanent. They kind of arise, they come about, and then they go. They don't stay long. They aren't stable or lasting. And this is something that we need to keep in mind, to hold in our minds, such that we don't cling to things as having some kind of permanence, particularly when it comes to the time of death. We will be able to face that without the same level of anxiety and trepidation, recognizing that this is just the nature of things. They are impermanent and fleeting.
Oh yeah. Then droe chi kala ta ta sung sung do. Dela ne chi gi de dela ne gen gen do simjen to zoro. Ne chi te da te pumbu lang ya pumbu tor gu yor do. Le da nyum be shang de ku ba sung da so so rang ke yo mare. I think this droe chi kala ta ta sung de ga trubung gen na she de sung gara. De ga trubung gen na she. O condition Geshe Thabkhe milike te yo to. Mije te ora ya lobu to chine ko. Tendru da tende le te re tendru re te ora. Ya tendru ne Geshe chine ya milike tenge yongura. Geshe nyawal ke tenge tendru ki la da la me o ta tende. Doa ri tu do kenge ke semjen to zora. Kumbun do le che te ya kichi che te. Doga thaba na shi. Kabri mire kabri nyawar kabri tendru re kabri la re. O din doga tham ke te kanga thab gura. Mi trap bo trap yoko trap kanga chachu trap kanga chura o dinashi pa samlong ne tambe na ti kan ju chen di chibu sam tang yo marwa chöse de kyong ma ne rangi da gi kyun di ora chimala ba yuan du gi che che kyo chima ndo ya ora da pumbu ni ga kyun pe chen ga sore kuran kyun di chikpa gyube ko ne ndo ya shi ora o tin di ndo ki ji kala ta ta so Doga tamke na shi se o ti inde ko mili ke yuna ta mili ta to tengen tende chingere chi yin sambe samlu te tang ju mera o tini singe ba to chi ku ye samsa tamadele chi yin sam ti samlu kore na ni chima penje ke to da tu ye samlu de kur ge wara o ti ko so na ane chi te pa pa ya da ke wa tu ye ti ngiri ngiri me na yongura Ti samlu mena ni chindi kyangya samlu tandine ti samlu koya yo mara. Ndre chi kala tadan sons ya ti chilana.
And then it continues the next line saying, the birth and death of beings resemble scenes in a play. So all of these beings who abide in the three realms of samsara, this is really referring to the way that they cast off, they take up various births and then cast those off under the control of karma and afflictions, thus revolving through these different sort of positions, like the way that players in an act, in a drama, would take on different guises and play different characters. So too, we sometimes are born as a human and then maybe born as an animal and then maybe born as a human, maybe born as a hell being, maybe then born as a hungry ghost. And so birth and death, it's sort of like as we cast off one body and then take up another, we recognize that sometimes we are human, but sometimes we are going to be born as other types of beings. So like in the kind of plays that they had in Tibet, I mean, the actors would take on all of the various different guises. So too, it's not just this kind of thinking allows us to go beyond thinking about just this life, that our continuum of the consciousness that we have right now came from previous lives, and we will go through multiple future lives. There isn't some sort of cutting off of that continuum. And so even if you have now been born as a human, you can recognize that this isn't going to last. This is not something that is stable, but rather I will have to die and potentially take on another rebirth, or will take on a rebirth that could potentially be in a negative state. And so this really compels us to do virtuous actions, to make an effort at accumulating virtue and purifying our negativities or eliminating those negativities. Because otherwise, if we don't contemplate the fact that we are going to have to die and move on, we can get so caught up in the affairs of this life. But recognizing how it is that we revolve, we cycle, we cast off one life and take up another, this really compels us to make an effort at doing virtue and abandoning non-virtue.
Oh yeah. Tene droya tsendro namge londa de sungdo. Chiwe chosun droya de tanda sambuchi teyu na ya. Chiwe chosu pa droya de sungora. Ane rangi ngangi pa chiwe tol pa drosha gre sungora. Ngobu tamze rangi trupcha ngende kon gyuro cheche ya. Drotengi sire te ordo. Tene ko droya tsendro chiwe chosu pa ta nyeru nyeru droya de namge lo na shin. Rangi ngangi pa yene ngangi jigdu gure se atandarwa. Droya tsendro namge londa des. Tenya ko chik tenya raba tindra ke yo marwa keji yugi yugi. Ane be tenya meba. Manjuri che ko tenya meba ya rondo ba tenya kwech. Risarum babju shinto nyonjo ros. Risaru ne maa chu chinto gui ne ko rondo re mato tenya se ke yo mara. O tina shingarazu sambu chen tenya sambu tenya zogi che chiwe chosu kope. Keji che madebi che gyude yora. Keji re ne che zogi nugu yora. Reserve babjushin do nyonjo ros. Ya, what did you learn?
So then the last two lines of this verse read that the transient lives of beings are like lightning in the sky, rushing by quickly like a fast-flowing mountain stream. So although we are alive right now, we have to recall death, because this is something that we are naturally going toward death. Any compounded phenomena from the very moment of its inception is moving towards its destruction. It is something that our life is moving by moment by moment by moment. It doesn't remain at all. It's something, this transience is sort of like a flash of lightning. It's here for a moment, but it's not going to remain. It's not something stable and reliable. And so too, it rushes by quickly like a fast-flowing mountain stream. This isn't something like a mountain stream is never stopping. It's constantly moving forward. So too, with each moment of our life, each moment we are sort of using that up. We are moving closer to the end of our life, toward our death. And so the life that we have right now is not something stable and lasting, but rather is subject to impermanence, moving more every moment toward that inevitable end.
Oh yeah, what in do tanda. Ngarazu tsede. Wa ni rama meba cheche kon yoban zo tu yore se. Chiwa mita pa tangwa tamze mita pa juwan ronge imbati shege wada. Ti shede ko shina kuyo mare. 도와서 쓰는 거라도 당진 시다치는 당부시에도 semble 도와서 있길래 야네 양도 삼을다나 땡고에 내치로 봐 공부 숨도 줍대야지라 근데 고시에 그요 말에 시엔 그요 말아 어디 인도 가서 그래 대배 릉들에서 거라 들랍지 가르랑 그랬으나 전에 동계에서 kim만 줘야 될이야 전에 레 개와다 메게 왜 떡제네 침마게 디두니디 용거레스 삼고 거라 어디 인데자고 대과 방야다 개와 두야라 티 삼로티게 슈긴 대그래 디나신 낭민럽지 나다 거리 나다 대대대대고 대외 추진 인삼 담모데 대외 추진 인삼 가가줘야 돼삼 어디 인데 대외 릉들라 야부제 전부다 제외권에 네 내구래서 매체도 야부제 개구래서 샹라 초아파 템버트 진이게 어디제 낭미나다 샹다 아메리칸이나다 카투도 기티체네 치마동게레 티 삼로 코야탄다 셰요라 마도지 베트타도 땡게스도 삼로 코데니 테 삼로 코고 말도 어디든 다른 마도지로 메다보데 땡코야데 가도 이나 다가라 소소레가 쟁게르 치네 다가라 롱바칠 신 소소레가 치네 어다 디시다데 메티 삼레가도 후다보다 지그라 요바 지그라 대대제 다와카시 지금마도 대매네 배댕갱 베선레체네 수술레가 제거해야 된 경우가 지금 말도 어딘데 던달 송교하라 어디인데 갈소래 어딘데 감성가 가와이네라 에네 갈소리 기실라 소바테서 라와메 바다 타레네 교아치마 펜제기 디두 고비네 첸딜라 표숨 소바 라와 디바파에 교아투에 술레이네 잠바다 제베코네 대야 근데 세번에 소소 첸딜레 랑 대보 첸딜레 대이기 줄렌도 요라 추세야 돼 첸딜레 대 줄렌도 오라 첸딜레 대외 주대 잠바다 저와다 저와메 바다 근데시 내버에나 교심을 배제 대화도 용거라 푸스 판바스도 내가 대화 푸스 판바 펜데 중에 상계지 땜바로 무치세 되다 어딘데 삼르다네 네 첸딜레야 마저 권에 닝부 정계바도 랭고 그래 로아 첸딜라 디기여게 치말라 펜도 여게게 어디인데 샹라 소아파 아니 펜바 트베 추데 트버차 대하더니 가서라 란치부 마이바 심제 탐제리기 동네다 저와다 저와 토바체 통경게 상마 로 탑다 시럽 상보다 신의 상마 탈신베 간사진 유라차야 상계지 고반 토버차 냠네 아니 니리니리나 메지 개와 춘존지 주바이나 어디 산계지 고만토베 규르규시티 타르심바 규르지사 뒷바 춘존지 빵바이나 디 용수 줘봐 자와네 빵야 타르심바 빵바 타르심바 규르지삼 삼르톰 땅바이나 디 산계지 고만토베 이테네 사벤샤기와라 사벤샤기와라 네바샤기와라 어디 손다 딘데 삼르타에 코네로와 데데비네 탑데베 공불루두기 제베 아니 우마르지 트웨컵스 응어도 당내리 톱지기 탑 강가 송교로 어딜이야 태바다 삼바 공베림지 죽버샤 님도 공로세 때문에 셈버쇼서 어딘디야
So, therefore, when we think about this, everything is changing without our having control over it. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. And teaching about death and impermanence is not intended just to scare us, although it might feel uncomfortable to think about at first because of our strong grasping at permanence. It is something that allows us to accept the kind of reality of the world. This isn't something that is taught just to elicit fear, but rather for us to come to recognize the actual nature of phenomena around us, that we ourselves are going to have to die, and that the things that we love, those around us, are also not things that we get to have forever. We are going to be separated from them. And as far as our future lives, our future is really dependent upon the kind of karma that we create, the actions that we engage in now. And so this really, when we recognize that we will have to separate from everything, this gives us an awareness of being heedful of karma, what kind of actions we are engaging in, and actually treating others without harming them, treating them with love and compassion in the present. So here, if we think that things will be as they are forever, this is problematic. We can't expect for all of the things around us and ourselves to have this kind of existence forever. But rather, if we recognize their impermanence, we will sort of prioritize what is most important in terms of the work that we are doing. And really, this kind of recognition encourages us to make an effort to accumulate virtue and to abandon our negativities and to actually treat those around us with this kind of non-harm, non-violence, and really treat them with love and compassion. If we abide in the present in that way, having harmony and love toward others, then this is really something that will be of benefit to us now as well as in the future. As I often say, the Buddha Dharma, the precious Buddha's teachings, are the source of benefit and happiness, and that there's the temporary kind of happiness that we gain from the present when we treat others without harming them. When we treat them with love and compassion, we are more harmonious in the moment, as well as creating the kind of causes for experiencing benefit in the future. And so recognizing death and impermanence is something that pushes us to really think about our actions, how we are treating others in our daily life, and making an effort toward accumulating virtue and getting rid of our negativities. And when we come to see that it's not just us that's in this situation, but rather it is all sentient beings. And if we were able to be of benefit to them, how wonderful would that be? That by developing this kind of perfect method and developing wisdom, we would gain a state in which we are actually able to be of benefit to others. And so we should set this kind of motivation, really in terms of listening to the Dharma here, but also in our daily life. When we do some small virtue, we should think, may this go toward the cause of bringing Buddhahood to culmination. That will become the seed of Buddhahood within us. When we eliminate some small fault, we should really think, may this go toward the cause of my being able to eliminate all faults and become a perfect Buddha. And so by doing that, we are able to really create on a daily basis the kind of seeds. This is the method for developing those sorts of imprints that will lead to Buddhahood. And so here, in order to be able to reach such a state, we need to study the Dharma. And here, on this occasion, we are studying the precious Garland by the master Nagarjuna, and more particularly on this chapter, which is teaching individually the cause and results of higher rebirth and definite goodness. So we should set such a motivation, again, thinking that we are listening to this Dharma for the sake of being able to achieve that state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Oh yeah, thank you much. Thank you very much. So get you to let you to go. Oh yeah. Thank you very much. Did you shake it? Gabulia and so look on the net of us. Get you ne, Cheshire. Tibato Redwa. Get you ne, Chaber to the Tamini, Tombani, Kishake. Kansa Tame, Shake Tamis, and the Bang Shake, Kansa Keshisone, Tombani Shesuna, Kansa Tamiro. Kansa Maige Pumbula Soba, Tezu Keshisone, Shesune, Shake Tamisira. Shujangere Madu, Kansa de Litara Kevaka Chosen Kansata Pumbula Soba Chutizutol, Kansata Chutamisha. O de Tia Wuchi, Yavuchi Tombani Chig Namsa Kosona. Chukanga Chigbar Wakazation, the Machinati, Koshadam, Madame, Rebetu, Madame, Shagri Mado, Kodan the Chigba Kokora. So Tia Wuchi Tambul and Everson, and Shamana Kajachuna, Kanga Hako, Rinda, the Chashim Skura. Chita Chuki and Dushin, the Shibati, Shikula, Lo Charsha Sungda, Tambuso Dame Bas, Social Chana Shesona, and then I Pumbu Sera. Any shen Itoma, ni Sutra, Tiro, the Jashu Kangalpa, Tadan Chikbatakura, did a Sumbares, a Rinja Shimakura. O Tindi, Yavuchi and Yakudwa. Can you tande ma Tambu Kansa, Dame the Shakdwa? They said the Nama, Captured in Gire. 기부스 또 담아지 또 라고는 무슨 다들 그래 야. 다들 기부삼이 주만이 있어. 때는 방어서. 기부삼이 주만이 메밀로메 남가메 남시 많이 꾸면은 텔레션에 기부 강화세. 어디 따던다 강사 소소 로 도메 마르 방아주 나오 냠벨로스기도 나오 냠벨로스데 나 지다요 말에 나삼비요 말에 다들 숨비요 말아 얘네 좀 아시도 라와지 삼고도 와가지고 나가라게 예 삼사체 각자체 다들 손좀 메라도 또 요르다 지단에 나 코란데 쟤네 각자 텐데 로가 메베세 코란 메베세 텐데 삼르당주데 케베송주에 요라 다단다 들리야고 각자티 여버시샤체체 파카에테 각자 군신스네메도 띠고 요라 디카르고 요스는 삼사 소소로 렌질이야 삼르나리 유두사 나한테 소소 풍부할 때는 딱 봐삼비 나이 삼비와 말해 나가라기 예 삼사게 딩에 속보로와 딩에 지지르세 아니 딩에 롱체자인 삼비 나한테 라와지 삼고 요라 랑신지 주바 랑원에 주바 랑게 공에 주바 딱 명망보 요라 대도 anga 찍어라 대담바 주바 템바 주바 속도도 주바셔라 따수도 주바셔라 제수도 주바셔라 랑도 주바셔라 어디 명망보 요라 티엔데 티 담보데 가래 가게 요라 동반이 수도 가래 동 주고라 티디 아버지 다 쳐고야지 요라 야 티지란나
So here then, where we are at in the text is picking up with verse 80. And these verses 80 through 100 of this first chapter are then going to be describing the two selflessnesses, that of the person and then that of other phenomena, the aggregates and so forth. And so here, apart from the basis that is characterized as being empty, there is no distinction in terms of the subtlety. So it's not as though the subtlety of the selflessness of the person is different than that of the selflessness of phenomena. The object that is being negated is the same. And so if you understand the general presentation of emptiness, then this is something that you can then apply to all different phenomena. If you come to understand this in relation to the person, then you need to just deploy that same kind of logic in the context of other phenomena. It isn't as though there is a separate or different logic that needs to be applied in order to determine the selflessness of the person and the selflessness of other phenomena. So there is a quotation in which it says, in the way that you understand the self, or like the lack of a self of a person, so too apply that to all phenomena. We use, again, the same kind of logic and reasoning in order to establish this selflessness of either person or any other phenomena. And so since beginningless time, we have had this grasping at a self, this grasping at a person, particularly as being like autonomously existent or existent from its own side. Now here we need to sort of distinguish. There is that kind of grasping at a self when we have a clear kind of, it's mixed with the object of negation. When we sort of just have a sense of ourself in everyday kind of environment and doing various things, this part of it that is what is to be negated, the object of negation, might be as clear. But when we are able to identify it, it is this holding to a self that exists in and of itself, in its own right, that in this kind of like autonomous way, by its own essence. There are many different terms that are applied to this. So this kind of existence wherein it is able to bear scrutiny or bear analysis is something that is existent from its own side, having this kind of independence and autonomous nature. There are many names, but really when it comes down to it, we need to see this, we need to be able to identify that object of a negation. Now here, as it comes in verse 80, this is describing the selflessness of the person, and it says the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them together. What person is there other than these? And this will then begin the discussion of the selflessness of the person.
Oh yeah. Oh, the Indian 뭐 콩도 사대 Sanjay sung do nal kawa sung do teach kung chi chegura.
Mm.
Any telete ya ti umabe tawa yena gombulu da dawa chakwa ro pabala la sobate suge shung chi kung tugura. O te ne tene umabale ina ya umarangyo bata thank you asaro loga yoda. O te inde shung chi le kung tugja tunda ti chegura mado ti shung le ya mandre ne ti chani deyo marwa. Mo ti inde kong gombulu da sanje da pabala da me lo ka sure. Dawa chakwa la sobate su shung do yaboche. Tani tina tindu samsa tichi shungchi dan del kora. Shungli mande ne chi ke shesha susu chananda shesha ne chananda mida nawa damida shaju yora tongba komshatu. Tongba komge mangbu yora su tongba komge yore. Yani ka sora namshi tongba kom taasu ngazu sungam ya samde tambu nibal dutu za su kanga kyon shishita tongba samtak yora. 야도 내 남시 숨이 감리니야 남시다 저저도야 차차저 동바만 못 공부도 동바 공내네 소소소게 각자르비지 차라만요 녀모 차라만요 지 개도요라 디치르발레 용비오라 낭발레 용비오라 야 디치르 소나가
So here it's important at the beginning to identify an authentic source, a source really in the teachings of the Buddha, a source in the sutras. And this is then the basis upon which we have this commentarial tradition of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and so forth. But there needs to be that kind of common base. Although we have different philosophical tenant schools, like the autonomists and the consequentialists and so forth, this needs to be something that is grounded in a kind of textual tradition. It isn't something that is just kind of made up or one's own fabrication. And so here, this is, again, when we think about emptiness, there is, in the context of developing the various meditative concentrations and the absorptions of the immaterial realm, those kinds of meditations are based upon a union of calm abiding and special insight that is a particular kind of emptiness. They are negating or seeing, for example, the faults of form and the faults of various more coarse states of mind, and meditating on a sort of emptiness of that. They are refuting various things, but we need to recognize that not every term emptiness is necessarily referring to that which is the kind of Buddhist understanding of emptiness. And so having a tradition that is grounded in authentic scripture is something that is very important for being able to properly identify the object of negation.
Oh yeah. 어디 이제 땅도 가지고 너나 전에로 실제기 너값을 송고도 대한 지대지 탄야지 왕게 인지 더 담반에 많이 넣었어요라. 뭐부터 좀 남샤시에도 강가 지대기 탄야지 따는 거부터 초벌에 시작하리다 들리미르를 따네. 아니 때때레 때마르 때레시 탄야시기요라. 저는 지대기 감사하라 tar바세하라. 뭐 소우자 때로를 잘서 강걸 탄야요라. 어디 현다다 만으로서 소소 팀을 많이 봐. 내가 대신 게 저와 대신 게 미르르르 따셔요라. 근데 대저 강가데 이 많이 세된 지대게 탄양하라 소리 와서 잡아나 시제 지대게 탄야게 왕게 샤고요를 송거라. 어디 멤버체 뭐 코란게 왕게 주의 랑원에 주도바지요 말스. 그냥 지대게 탄야게 왕게 이제 더 담반에 많이 넣었어. 이 코란게 뭐네 저 나다 생겼지 이세 로 나무 생겼지 이세 주랑원에 주도고요나 아니 저 탄야게 왕게 샤고요 말에 탄야 가르다 못하요 말에 코란원에 주도고요라. 산지대게 탄야게 왕게 이제 더 담반에 많이 넣었어. 아니 전에 수네 저 남견데 강가 매송고요라. 실제게 되어가서 소메타메세 때 당부들한지 대기 탄야 요청 담반 많이 넣었어. 아니 넘버 탐제치 뭐 산제지 봐도 강가야 레레레서 안에 타르와다 탐제치 뭐 정말 매매매스 것도 와. 어디나시 실현님 비값서 가서 가서래. 쇼 탐제 랑신지 동반 넘버 양다 보셔서 따오세. 수고도 와 당부들래. 쇼 탐제 랑신지 동반 넘버 양다 보셔서 따오세. 아니 소메타메티 강가 매서 것도 와. Tindeke chago mene chue kanga me ta me kanga me sungo de la rangshi da tanya jiwa ki shakwa yin da tindeke sungu mara nyuda saro rwa chida ne kaya ina ni kage yo mara si sungsha dira ni kage yo mara se pezi sungu mara kage me na sungen yo mara sungwa bo yo mara kansa yo mara konge yo mara ni sungu echa yo mara o ti indiko kakcha te Tianchi Tenji Tanya Wangi Shakwa Ingi Tadambana Mayina Osara. Rangshingi Tomba Namba Yanda Chesa Tawasa Tatin Dokangana Mambu Yora. Or did you soon? Yeah.
So here, as it says in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, that all phenomena are posited by the power of convention, by the power of our labels or conventions, but they don't have ultimate or inherent existence. And so here, this is a really important concept to understand. What is being said here is that everything within this world, like from this worldly realm to liberation, sound, sights, sounds, smells, taste, touch, and so forth, all of this is established, is existent by the power of convention. By putting labels on various functions, we determine, oh, this is that, and we give it that kind of a label, but they aren't established from their own side, in their own right. So if it were the case that the objects existed from their own side or within their own right, then the name, the label would have to sort of just appear there. The self would be the self from its own side, or like blue would just be blue without our giving it that kind of a label. But it doesn't, but nothing exists in that way. Whether we are talking about form, sound, smell, taste, touch, all the way through omniscience, all of these phenomena, as it explains here within the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, don't exist inherently or from their own side, but rather exist by the power of convention. And so here we need to understand this, as it explains in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. We have the line that says that we should see perfectly that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. And then it proceeds to say there is no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch. If we don't understand that properly, that this is referring to a particular kind of inherent existence or existence in and of itself, then there is the danger of thinking that this means that they are utterly non-existent. And so therefore, if it were the case that these things were utterly non-existent, then who would be the person teaching about it? Who would be the person listening to it? There would be no need to teach of any of this if it were the case that there was just utter non-existence. And so we need to understand how it is that this, as this is explained in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, that all phenomena, although they lack that inherent existence, they exist by means of convention. However, they don't have that kind of ultimate or existence in and of themselves as they appear to us.
Oh yeah. Mo tene gombulu druge shongma bina ti yongdwa. Be zawashiro de chashagina. Gange tenjen debarin jo ura mar. Tenjen jo. Tenjen debarin jo ka tene tongba ni du shesira. Tene tene dagba te tene ume lami no se. Tenje de be mambu songwe wara. De so de changme na le tenje de mambu so. Tongba ni tuye ge chusen so de tartu sa de tenje le togdwa. 자 망보질 때전 relne ne ngobo rangante ngoji 당에 따네 샤고 그러면도 망보 때전 rel 메고네 코라 랑원에 랑게 투버 랑주 투버치 랑게 ngo여서 요데베서 요 말이 대선자고 땡데데 계신 붙였습니다. 땡제 데버를 좋아하가 아세 ten이 동반이 되셔. 담부 기도이네 뭐보이네 기도이네 교단께 망보질 소원에 네 로버도 제초운데고 규진고 왕이야 두고야마도 랑원에 수트베시와 마라. 티나시 좁상게 ngo디 파타도 차셰다 dak시 망부질 때네 아니 대강바레 대체제레스 파 따고라. 자 따서들고 차 망부질 뜻인데 파치 따고도 와. 어디데 땡진 레버는 종아가. 땡제 dak시 뜻다 땡제 대단 rel네 아니 뭐 가르 통했다기나 디샤고로 마도 대수다 만들자 코라치 수전자 수제랑은 주에시와 말해서 거라 대전 레버 종아가스 테네 동반이도 셰세티 대지 되면 되네 또 뭐냐. 되네 때네 딱보다는 매르베스 오 매마르야 세로. 되네 때네 딱보다는 때제 마부 대시 차셔 마부 초네 때려봐 민지 따네 당연히 왕게 파샤고 그래서 그런 거에 수치 축tuk도 랑신지 랑게 라와제는 그런 수주베시 와 말해서 그거라. 어디지 그러냐.
So here, there are many different quotations that establish this, including from Nagarjuna's fundamental verses on the middle way, where he emphasizes, where he says that whatever is dependently originated, that is explained as empty, as emptiness, and that which is dependently designated, this is the middle way. So really, in teaching about emptiness, this all goes back to dependent origination. Dependent origination is seen as extremely important because for all phenomena from their very inception, from their production, don't exist from their own side, but rather they are designated, they are dependently designated on the basis of a collection of parts, on a collection of causes and conditions, dependent upon the basis of designation and the mind which is designating that. Other than that kind of interdependent origination, there is no thing, no phenomena that is existing in and of itself, in its own right, apart or sort of independent of its various parts, the various causes and conditions that led to its arising, or are dependently designating it. So again, whatever is dependently originated, that is explained as emptiness, as not having that kind of inherent existence. But if we then think that, well, oh, does that mean that phenomena are utterly non-existent? Well, no, that which is dependently designated is the middle way, in that it isn't that phenomena are utterly non-existent, but rather on the aggregation of the various parts that compose a basis of designation. There are the various causes and conditions and parts and so forth. We dependently designate. We say, oh, this is that. So it isn't that phenomena lack existence entirely, but that they are not existent again in the way that they appear to us, with that kind of autonomous existence from their own side.
뭐야, 뭐 저래 들리소. 뭐 되네. 네. 박발하고 쇼나요도 쉽게 반나려고도 와. 네그 라와 매바데 테나 따네요 마이스. 추탐제 다메세게 다데 송거라. 추탐제 다스도 강사 집을 고지와 마라. 추탐제게 당니서라. 랑 당니 강배 당니 수기 당니 자의 당니 랑게 고오셔라. 되송거라. 추탐제 다음에 봐서 랑게 고오데 랑와도 주바시오 마레세 랑원에 주바시오 마레세 딜 다음에 봐서 거라 네 가사 그때도 샤네 가사 다음에 가사 마이베 추토저 그때도 추기 다음에 시기도 전디고 랑와 매바데 때나 다네 요 마이 소래 추탐제 다음에도 시베 다데 랑와에 당니 기초 가야 요 마레세 거라 네그 랑와 매바데 때나 다는 어디 가도 내가 나와 잡아 시계변 잡아 요라 지나를 때 요거 봐 어서 된다 들라 다지 차원에 세더라 딘 잡아들다 단다 바발라 시계변 뒤치되긴 잡아라 들라 다지 차원에서 다메서 다지서라 들라 다지 차원에 관심 없는 남자 샤라 랑말레병 오랑 시대에서 시계변은 되게 라와메바데 소소소 테네다니 이메스타딘 데바자고라 텔라다지 차원에 관심 없는 남자 샬라 라말레병오랑 시데스 테메보네 다메보 라메 당니도 메바텔레 다메보세레서 대한 초다 강사기 남반이 소데니 강사 담에 치기 다메보 송고도 야 되지르나
So here, another quotation to support this is from the Master Aryadeva's 400 verses. And so here he has a line that says that when we talk about the self, and here when we are saying self, this is not something that is solely applicable to persons, but rather is the sort of nature, the essence of something. And so such a self in the context of selflessness means that kind of autonomous, independent existence from its own side. And so to lack such independent existence is to be selfless. And so therefore, here, when we are talking about selflessness, this can be applied to the person and to phenomena. And actually, what is being negated in terms of that self or that essence is this sort of autonomous existence. And Chandrakirti further glosses this in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses, where he says that here, the self, as is being described here, is a kind of nature that is not dependent upon anything else, that has its kind of existence in and of itself without having to be dependent or reliant upon any other phenomena. And the lack of that kind of existence, or that sort of nature, essence of both phenomena and persons, is then the twofold selflessness of that of persons and phenomena. So here, this is the kind of part of the source material for this, Aryadeva's 400 verses, where he explains that that self is this kind of autonomous existence, and the lack of that then is selflessness. And Chandrakirti further explicates that in his commentary to this, basically explaining that the self that we're talking about is some sort of nature that isn't dependent or contingent upon other phenomena.
Oh yeah, or tati kadu shenla rama lebe ngo rang shin te meba ne da meba sung do digo rama meba de se te rama me shenla rama lebe yoba de rama do yoba se te shenla rama lebe shibe shen de karil sigre che tonga ba lamre la do chimena de se ja do oh tela shenla rama lebe sheba ne gyujin shenla rama lebe la sewa mingi se ora te chena gyujin shenla rama lebe se ne ragba de do ra kale kabu ke me do sama ha ko ra chi te ne gyuden ken le te ni de bu ke da ha ko do nga cha sa gyujin shenla rama lebe la sewa ma re se ne karil se re se na tanye be sheba la de re se che ta chan de be sheba chora traye tanye da lo ye tanye se ni yora traye tanye se de ming ta ye de ra lo ye tanye se tang bu sam de le ming kar ta do ta ne pa o ti pomba se sho ti ka wa se sho sam lo ye tanye ra ni che ma di ka wa de pomba ren de me re se che lo ye tanye ra sa tanye be sheba de la ji de gi tanye be sheba de ya shen se gre se de wa ge sha ba me be yoba de la ni ra wa do yoba se gre se de la ka se re shen se sheba ni gyujin shen la ra ma le bo le so me ge se juden be tanye be sheba le shen se cha la de wa ge sha ba me be yoba la ni ra wa do yoba se ge ra da gi na jun do na chi do so tian juden gi tanye ge wa ge yin ge se de da ba ne ma yin no so da o de ne se juden be tanye be shebe wa ge sha ba ma yin ba yu ko ra ngwe ne su yoba na ni ra wa do yoba se ge ra and juden be tanye be sheba ge da shi da cha she ma bo chi le de ne ani de tumo de le ga chen ge chi pa ming ji da she de juden ge tanye ge ong sha ra ma bo chi cho ba da shi le de ne pa da ge or do o ti sung do kin de do shen la ra ma le ba she be shen de gyu jin shen la ra ma le ba se ne ne ra ba de ba chang ba ha ko to do tong ba ni ti ma re tanye be she ba le shen shi cha de ong ge sha ba min be ni yo ba de le ra wa do yo ba se ge re sung do ya ti chi la na
So here again, continuing with this, Aryadeva has said that this self, in the context of selflessness, is this kind of autonomous existence. And then Chandrakirti further glosses that to say that this is referring to kind of existence which is not dependent or contingent on another. And so then here we get to the commentary by De La Matsongkhapa in his section of the Great Stages of the Path, dealing with special insight, in which he explains that this is not just referring to, like, when it says it's not something that is not dependent upon another, that other isn't just referring to causes and conditions. It isn't as though the autonomous existence that is being negated or denied is the kind of autonomous existence that is a kind of independence from solely causes and conditions. That is a more coarse kind of understanding, but rather, as is explicated in that sutra quotation, this really has to do with more subtle levels of the fact that phenomena are posited by designating conventions. And so here, when we say convention, we can be talking about the word, the like sound that we give as a name to phenomena, but also the thought, that designating mind, the kind of mental picture that we have of things, where we say, oh, this is this, and so forth. And so to have this kind of autonomous existence is to have an existence which is not dependent on not only causes and conditions, but also this process of designating with a basis of designation and a mind that designates with convention. And so here, this is the kind of more subtle level. I mean, to a certain extent, everybody can understand that phenomena, particularly conditioned phenomena, depend upon causes and conditions. But in terms of the sort of autonomous existence that is being referred to in that Aryadeva quote and the Chandrakirti commentary to it, and then here the Jilamatsongkhapa commentary, is really referring to an autonomous existence that is independent of designating conventions. And so as we go back to this quotation from the Prajnaparamita Sutras, where it says that all phenomena exist due to the power of convention, they don't have some kind of autonomous existence. This is really getting at that same idea that it's not just dependency upon causes and conditions that is being highlighted with the sense of this dependently designated, but it is that dependence upon the conventions, those labeling conventions and that kind of process, and that the phenomena, both persons and phenomena, don't have a kind of existence independent of that.
Oh yeah, that's what they do call company call Sunju Tosmeda Yora, the Cabatule Sunju Medamada Mabuyode. Oh, they do Casore, Serumbuchita Soyeti, the Uma Chuseda, Uma Jubada, Jubada, Andreta, or Tanda to the Shiachi Sungura. Oh, this one to Cabacashake, this one to the one. Casore, that Tombani de Tanda Serumbuchita to the Soshavate. 동이 참모도 말해서 라 동이 참모마다 들을 타와티 현다티 공부들스만 보여라 근데 아니 간다 동반에 소주데 개박하셔야한테 정보서래 가서래 어째선가 뭐 따와디 디 가서래 나와다고 시샤셔샤세 나와다보다 공부를 신도도 시샤시샤시나 공부를 송창마데 따와 터두 때문에 말해서 따와 싫었다 식세다 터주간가 터두 따와 땡기고 말해서 어디데 저저 따와 터두 때문에 좀 많이세 근데 소주에 와라 어디 다나 가르쳐 공부를 뜻서 가서 때문에 동이 참모도 때문에 참모는 내려서 디마도 자와시럽다 주주감내 때문에 돈이 타슈데 말을 뜰 타와요 그래서 어딘데 손주지요라 야 뒤질었나
So here, when it comes to emptiness, there are different sort of ways of teaching about this. And here, when we look at the entry to the middle way, Chandrakirti's text, his own auto-commentary to that, as well as Jilamatsongkhapa's commentary to Chandrakirti, some assert that this is not a description of the most subtle kind of emptiness. They would say that there is a more subtle version of emptiness that isn't taught there. So this is a kind of, again, a position that would take that the sort of intent that is brought forth in Chandrakirti's entry to the middle way, as well as his own auto-commentary, and then the commentary by Jilamatsongkhapa, really even looking at the kinds of texts of Nagarjuna on which those are based, things like his fundamental verses on the middle way, and so forth, there are those who would say that that hasn't taught the final intent of the Buddha or the final kind of meaning of emptiness, but rather you have to look at the collections of praises that are given by Nagarjuna to see where he taught the final kind of intent of emptiness. So again, this is getting at the kind of discrepancies that there are in what is accepted as the final presentation of emptiness.
뭐야. 다이나야 뜻하고 나를 뜻하기 시계바다 대전하를 숨바나시야 잡을 손주 요래. 이 롱치 장내 보이지래. 로. 린 지대len 대버 떠봐서 공부를 주제라. 지대len 대버 떠봐 나를 시요다. 아니 때까지서는 땡진 대버를 강조와서 땡진 대버를 때는 좋아 강에 받아서야. 땡진 대버를 강조와 등이 저기 동버시스 산재계는 땡진 대버를 좋아 강에 받아 동반이 송샤스거라. 등이 저기 동버시. 다 동바데 가르스는 뭐고 라와 유명시 뭐고 라와 유명시 뭐고 라와 유명시 생계다에서 저라 뭐고 라와 유명시 아니 가서래 생계 뭐고 라와 유명시 아니 가래 뭐고 라와 유명시 냠메 교제 생계대 오라 뭐고 라와 유명시 냠메 교제 생계대 직배 매버 송버레 땅어버 마와다 치르바다 강어버 랑원데 투바요아레 랑시 투바요아레 송게 시시라 어때줄야네 산제게 직배 매버 신나 매버 라 랑원데 투바 랑원데 투바 뭐요 마레스 송샤세라 어진데고 지텔렌 데베 뜨바날 요고도 땡제 데바라 강쇼와 디니 쳐지 동버시스 뭐버 랑와미 요메시 냐메 쳐지 생게테스 어때 대소날 때도 요라 라마도 주바요 말에세 땡지 데버죠 강이 버데 동반이래셔라 아니 강 동버에서는 뭐 라마 유메시 냠메 추지 산절시고라 냠메치 생게데 직바 매바 오 디샤네 디가 유섬 직바 매바 뭐베네 중문에 임바다 어딘데 송도 디치람나 디도
So here, as a response to that, though, to give a quotation from one of the kind of praises, and again, there are various collections of praises composed by Nagarjuna, but in one that I'll just say as the praise of the transcendent or that which goes beyond the world, there is this same idea as we have been discussing. So here again, it says basically that whatever is dependently originated, that is taught to be emptiness. And what does that mean in terms of emptiness? It is having this kind of lack of autonomy. There is no autonomous or independent sort of existence. And so you, incomparable one, have proclaimed this lion's roar. So here, when it comes to the kinds of lower tenant schools, like those including the realists and so forth, they would say that there has to be sort of some existence from its own side, some kind of inherent existence for there to be existence at all. But here, as opposed to accepting such a proposition, as the Buddha has taught, that whatever is dependently originated, that is empty. And what does it mean to be empty, really, is to have no autonomy, to not have that kind of autonomous, independent existence. And so here, this is establishing that phenomena are not existent in the way that those lower tenant schools might assert. And this is something that the Buddha, the incomparable speaker, has proclaimed as like a lion's roar, in the way that there is no fear or trepidation because this accords with actual reality.
Oh yeah. 어다 된다디 송주 망부여라 대주 참마 된데 예섬 내내 오여라 대야 송주 참마디 테마테 세데 고치 버저데 소저데 데모도 소저데 버저데 모데 고 리베 딱서 제요라 이나 소소소 따와 가리를 콘토는 공부이나 대야 녀모 시와다 펜도 매와다 된데 제려 말아 동박하제 겁나 녀모 시에다 당지 시에다 총총드에 처당 녀모 총총드에 강가고 연구라 다야 그 바셰도서 소수 줍지디 셰그라 디메 줍지디 에세 퍼저디 데무디 셰르즈 거라 이마에서 내 삼주제는 데데 콩디 데르반디 에세라 퍼저디 체네 데무디 세르즈도 요라 어디다 여고 그래도 그 집에 산지 좀 되게 딱지 지송고 봐. 결로 다감 개남지 세제 대회 세신도 연수 따랑 아이가 라어자의 구실면세 라어자의 매밤 셔지 개바 죽매 자세. 딱지 지송에 대 수수를 받게고 와도 네 강갈 구주다 단다 여버시 단다 여와 어디인데 소수를 가르겁나. 그는 남배쪽다 뭐이나 심담배 따와직 쉐를 공자 더도 우마랑기 바나랑기 베치 쉐라 대다 대신이다. 근데시 전에 야 뭐 대치선이 야 요나.
So here, when it comes to these different kinds of explanations, we see that there are different ways of speaking about emptiness, and something that is accepted as reasonable, as viable according to one school, might not be accepted as reasonable by another. So there is a kind of internal debate, but we should recognize that the sort of purpose, I mean, when we engage in learning these various tenet schools, it is for the purpose of being able to eliminate the afflictions. And so here, when it comes to, we shouldn't just sort of accept it as like, well, this is what my school says, and so this is what the view is. But as the Buddha has repeatedly stated, we have to actually investigate for ourselves in the same way that we would investigate gold by cutting and rubbing and burnishing it and so forth. You need to use your own kind of logic and investigation in order to really determine what the meaning is. And here, the purpose of that ultimately is to be able to eliminate those kinds of afflictions. And so that's why emptiness is being taught at all.
야. 된대잖아. 된대라. 저한테 한테 뭐 대체셔나 야부 그래. 가서래. 나도 자시를 값어 요거도 뭐블로도 최초들 관계 땡진 레버를 좀세. 뒤가서 땡디데 야 개침부시다지 송구도 저 땡디데 지 땡진데 네 초벌 때는 내가 챙겨지 요래서 뒤 고였던다라 땡진 레버죠 관계 땡진 레버죠 각과 매봐서 지당 각과들어 각과 매봐 깨매봐 채봐 매봐 딱 매봐 와 매봐 로 매봐 타데데 메테지메 쪼바니 시세 쪼바니 어시와서 어디디 동반이 참 송구요라 저 주반이 시세디 오양 개박은 것이 손주 됩니다. 요또 돈이 매가서야 돼. 셔나 뒤지면 도세 단다. 지종가 봐도 저 돈이 매가서 거라. 매가 돈다. 한때를 가보자는 개박하시 손에 매가서도 전주 시고 말에 라조 생생다 된대지요 말해서 좀 거서래. 수비어 되네시. 매가서도 가서래 가셔도 봐. 가좀 들려 매가서라. 수 주에시 매워지 가셔가 som게 동바들라 저번 여월 시와서나 동바 라 어딜이야 매가세 디 각바디 코들로 레데치 기티날 talking about 야부고도 매가세데 가르스네 가자 파까고 삼마도 수 주에게 매버들 매가세 그래서 가자지 파까네 수 주바시 현다지 수 주에는 많이 가세라 야 어디인데 근데 소주에 와래 때인도 메가 가리 마이가 가리를 숨기 어떠서 그 딱자신이 시고요 어도 어디지라 아니 되라
So here, talking about the sort of again, I think this would be helpful to quote again from the praise, the beginning homage at the beginning of Nagarjuna's fundamental verses on the middle way. He talks about that which is dependently originated. For that, there is no cessation, no arising, no coming, no going, no permanence, no annihilation, not one. Not sort of unitariness and not multiplicity, but rather this is the stilling of all. The stilling of all elaborations, perfect peace, referring to this emptiness. And so here, emptiness in this, in the context of, as it is explained by Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna and then Jelamatsongkhapa as well, is asserted to be this non-affirming negation. Now, this is something that is debated over by various scholars. So when it comes to the kind of understanding understanding of the Prasangika school, they would say that this sort of the stilling of all elaborations or the pacification of all elaborations, they're referring to emptiness, is referring to this kind of a non-affirming negation, which, as is described by Baba Viveka in his Blaze of Reasoning, is a kind of negation where you have merely negated something, but you have not established something in return. Now, some would assert that that is problematic, that you can't have emptiness be a non-affirming negation, whereas others would say that that is actually the most reasonable sort of an answer. So here we can see how it is that various scholars interpret differently the same kind of passages in accordance with their particular views.
Oh yeah, condition. Tama de solo ka kechu derida. Kansa ta me shege ora tanda. No. Kibu ne ka do. Kibu sami chumaye. Me long me namga me namshi maye kwe me na. Tele shena kibu kama sungudwa. Ta kansa ta me shede kansa de shege ora. Kansa de soso de ta soso pa cha de ta da ora. Nga namju soso ko samde nga de kondeshi ba samde. Nga sudu rawa de samgudwa. 풍부 라 뜻은 제일 메고 버리지라 소보다 sem다 소와도 줄은 제일 메고 버리지 도줄 왕 경계에 소보로 왕 경계에 소르지 고나 랑주 통계 랑화 통계를 지삼 고구도 마도 지금 풍부다 sem다 류다 뜻수 강가를 뜻은 제일네 얘네 명다 상계 시인 삼사 삼로 지금도 대삼비 여보 말에서 강가랑이 요 삼사를 지삼 고구도 어디요, 디요나서 다째네 가봐요, 세기 와라. 딱던 세세라 들려. 랑위네 요나, 랑와도 투바치요나. 라, 나라도 삼부샤는 강가랑 그 요새 소리도 기케랑 요네 가기 뭐다. 계란 라바 강바 데 간디네 지족바도 나자도 빠바다 샤다 기바다 망보여 저저네 레레레 말아. 텔레션치 계란 베티다. Pet loga, one seven as a tap on a shade, the logachi or the Vesene, Tretsegiora. No, Yana sem derive, Yana Toa derive, Yana Dushi derive, Tindetsegiora. Tise do intina and engage Ragmara. Doctor says, Tish tag between that the Rangwina Yona, that's any need you. Taxu to Trubasigdo. Taxation did is Sichira Yokuara. Taxu to Truba, Chesu to Trubase. 랑은에 연에 따따서 제수도 주고 그래. 지다 연에 따서 제수게 주고 요 말에. 그때는 딱 봐서 마도 뒤에서랑 이중은에 제네라 이렇게 요구 말아. 때는 남두를 차시는 당연히 신대도 빼차라. 다 대서 남두다 안에 디 컴퓨터 다때 담는데 내가 챙겨도 와. 도전을 급제 빼 망보여라. 다시 빼 망보여라. 남두 포르게서 남두 밥수 세로야 남두 견쇼 샤세로체 mambu도 왔다 되는 마신 딱시 때 망보여라 내가 챙게 계속 상막이 내가 전에니야 그 미티게 삼부다야 까니야 는 남두 퍼슨스 다 남두만 밥슨스 남두 잘라 따르 찔리 견쇼는 남두 견쇼 샤세라 지도 코치 티canjan 남두게 마루와 따르지 지부도 마루 티나 텔리 견쇼선 남두 견쇼 샤세다 인바시 차샤고도 근데 저도 강가를 때진 될네 아니 내가 찍찍이요래 강가 속과 그전에 대치도자다 남부 필수서 때내 딱 보자 다시라 때네 아니 발로 봤다는 남부 부르 될 남부를 다시 대 컴퓨터를 다시 대치지를 다시 대 내가 대다 대치를 다시 당연시기도 그때는 나 라운드 두바치네 때는 다 가르에서 찍 때 여러 때 요마로 Tarda re midere mare kolo dere chilo pakwa dere te maro chilo pakwa de mena ya portu maro lakwa kindu jure hastu balena ne koti kwabu yara te inde ko 상마 chogwala tenjen delne ene chawa cheboji 시용구도 하고 hotel 안에 차래 te 자지 다갈 샤고래 참매 근데 니에게 요구 말에 스콜레가 챙겨지 주고도 와 어때 손자고 tenjen debar jongala chache rongre satira tenjen debar mangbuchil tenjen dene chil chawa chidene tik chawa chebrese kansa chawa chebe shago do o tende ko tate segi warda nanda 다데 소소데 라와도 주바치요나 다스바 제스바 케란스 남주 삼바나 신디요 나스고라 네다 가이데레세 소보게 강디네 치즈바도 야제기요라 강베미네 제제로와 샤다 박바다 규바다 아니 차다 추세다 루고다 망부요라 탁베 차들라 사인 중앙스고라 탁베 차들야 넘바 추세다 차도줄야 추인 중앙스고라 저들이야 매일 중앙에서라 기부삼매 주마에서 상원에 말다 길로사 쓰려 말에 답변하지는 사실 태버들 사실이라 착버리들 사실이라 뒤에 착버리들 사실 아니 렘바타다 추시대 하고 렌시 렘베스더라 기부삼매세 사이 중앙 ruba다 착버차도 좀 말해서라 기부삼매 주마에서 나로게 타다 추시라서 버텨서 말해서라 주섬 주면 매매에서 롱비차 말에 저기 차시와라 저도 맨날 밑대기 오마라 동도라 저기 차대 구경하러 선부치 때알이야 삼일 주마에 매매에서 롱매에서 우중을라서 봐 우파단 수단 시대 구경하러 롱 기부 삼일 주마에 매매 롱매 남카매에서 동산대 구경하러 우당 고요를 나로도 짜나 신짜나니 콘줄래가 제라고 말어 동바 고요라 강가 우당서 거래 대체서 거링도 닝도 구조자서 거라 그때 그 부가 남과시기도 하텔 남과시도 칠로 남과 딱 받을 수요 말다 동상게 차대 내고 이간에서 부가 남과시기라 어쩌죠 우당에다 대서 고요라 짜게 쓰러지네 내가 우당서라고 말어 그 우마다니 대로식 말아. 세상다 마부질 뜻은 저기도 대신에 레레 제기와라. 다들 메동나 아니 다 가반도 세기와라. 다 찔리도 주서 메도세 아니 가래서 어때서 관계 내가 전 밑에 공부점 로선 다 로서 세우라. 락발 좀 말해서 다 마셔 세우라. 락반에 제 창시 대신에 어디 뜻이래서 뜻이 들려서 락반에 주지도 되라 뜻이 들려서 락반 뜻 투라 락반에 그 말아 오늘서네 다이네 그 다가 샤고도 땡지 레버를 좋아서 다가 샤고도 차 샤고도 어디 인데 뭐 간대지나 차셰암 dak시 찍버리서 차셰다 dak시 망보질 때네 내려 봐지 딱 그래 이때 거저 하루 버리서 내가 생겼어요 텔이야 다가 샤오로 다 누구도 다 내기도 다 내기도 다 개와셔서 다 띠고셔서 그 메시지 강가 타냐 샤오로 뜻이라 땡진 레버리 좀 소자 단다단들 간사 담베셔라 기부삼에 추마이 메메롱메 남가메스 남시 마이 꾸메 나서 셰바 세시르 바데 다 말에서라 뜻이부다르게 말해 남시 마이 꾸메 나서도 대도 강가 촉바스나 뒤에 다르게요 말해. 풍부가 촉바하셔라. 양라도 강가 초나 신대르비신에 양라 강가 뿡샤는 그 강가 초대요. 되게 내가 지금 말어. 촉바대에 낚시되더라. 촉발을 때는 봤다고요라. 자꾸 낚시되다 때는 딱생인데 가가야 되더라. 촉바 고란데 이나니 촉발을 때는 봤다고 말어. 촉바대 들으셔서 그래. 될 때는 따고 된 거 말아. 그지도 리소하세 남시 많이 꾸면은 텔레시나 기부가세 소바대야 말해세 다들 오마 주바다 드바이네 입대야 말해세 라 입대다 말해 가도도 말해 레레 마부 차쇼라 아니 꾸면은 텔레시나 기부가세 텔레 텔레시한테 풍부 소부 차셔도 삼마간가 파샤 텔레 모신바 ngōsido kuni bē gyubzhēdo kāgā yīngi tātā pālā nāshī ngōmbudā sēbu nāshī rō ngō tīndē ngōmbudā sēbu nāshī tātā pālā nāshī ngō kāgā yōne tēlē ngō tātā sikirā kuni kēn rāwa yō mā rō lākwa yēba yō mā nāshī lākwa yēba hōshī shēne yō mā shēba rō mā rō sā tīne lākwa yēngi dē ngō tātā rō kō ngō tīne shīnshēne 풍부레 배드 로가 로스 지요르스 때요 말아 기연아니 그 풍부레 로스 다지요나 니 라바다 강바다 증거다 드즈레가 제부터 다하게 내가 제부 누 말해 그배 로가요라 배 군이 되어요 말아 어디서요다 야 된다 보셔 tele shena kibu kan so te chuklo na.
So here then, turning back to verse 80, this is looking for the kind of person. This is searching for the self of the person. And so it says, the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, not all of them together. What person is there other than these? So here, when we are looking for the person, like looking for this I mean, we have to recognize we have this feeling of I as like an independent kind of an entity. It's like this I that sort of has control over our various aggregates, that is somehow like the controller of those, or it has some kind of existence that seems to be in and of itself, like in its own right. But the I does not appear to us as something that is merely designated by mind upon a collection of parts and causes and conditions and so forth. And if we engage in a kind of investigation, looking for, searching for that self within its basis of designation, if it were to exist in the way that it appears to us, in the way that we think that it does, like from its own side, we would have to be able to find it. It would have to be something that was able to sort of bear scrutiny and analysis. So when we look through the various kinds of again, the various parts that constitute this thing that we call the I, it's not as though we can find it. Like if we look through our form, going all the way from the bottom of our feet up to the top of the crown of our head, looking through our skin and our muscles and our bones and so forth, there's nothing that you can point to that exists as it appears. It exists as that I that has that kind of independent, autonomous existence. And it's also not the case that there is this sort of self totally separate and apart from the aggregates, kind of like yellow and blue, or an ox and a cow that are entirely different and and have their own kind of essence or nature. So here, this looking through, this kind of examining our looking at the basis of designation here in the context of the person being these five aggregates, if it were again the case that this I existed in the way that it appeared to us, as it would be something that could bear analysis, bear scrutiny. And in general, in order to exist, something doesn't need to be able to bear scrutiny or bear analysis in this way. And so when we think about the way that phenomena do exist, as we've been explaining, through the force of convention, there are so many, like look around the world, we have all kinds of different things, all kinds of different material things that we have created and so forth, various objects like planes and computers and telephones and so forth. And so when we talk about these, we are doing so in a way that is designating a thing upon a particular basis of designation, a collection of parts. But that basis of designation is not the thing itself. If we search for it within there, we can't actually find it. So whether we are talking about a computer or a plane or something, we can talk about, oh, the plane is flying, the plane is landing. But if we try to find, well, where is the plane? What is it exactly that is that plane within that basis of designation? There's nothing that we can point to going through all of the various parts and so forth. Like we can say, oh, the plane is broken, but the one part that isn't functioning, that is broken, that is not the plane, right? But we speak in conventional terms of the plane being broken, of not being able to function. And so really we have all of these various different components, these materials, particularly now we have these sorts of various things that we have designated, but it's not as though any of that exists from its own side. This is how phenomena appear to us, but if they existed in the way that they appear, they would have to be findable within that. So it is independence upon a collection of parts, a collection of causes and conditions that we designate. Oh yes, it is that thing, and it is able to function as such. But when we engage in analysis and investigation, we can't find that thing. So here, when we look again, going back to the scriptures, it says that for those things that are dependently originated, all actions and agents are suitable or viable. And so here, like when we look at, for example, we think about the kind of self, we have this sense of an I, and it is on the basis of these aggregates that we designate this I. But if it were to exist in the way that we think that it does, we would have to be able to find it. We could begin by looking through the various physical components of the body. And so here, like it says in this verse, the person is not earth. And not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness. Now here we're talking about the elements within the body, the kind of things that have that hard sort of structure to them are referred to as earth, and then the sort of liquid elements within our body are referred to as water, and then fire is the kind of heat that we have in the body. And so we need to have that sort of heat. If we are lacking in heat, we are not alive. We also have to be able, we are dependent upon wind, or there's the wind element in the body. We need to breathe. We also have to have space. If there aren't internal spaces within the body, and again, we're not talking about externally that sort of permanent space, but rather the kinds of cavities within the body that allow for our heart to function, our lungs to expand, and so forth. And so when it comes to all of these various elements, constituent elements that make up the body, we don't have any, we can't point to them and say, oh, this is the self, this is the I, and so forth. And again, when we talk conventionally, as the body moves along, as we go and we take steps, we say, oh, I'm walking. But when we try to find, well, where is that person, that I that is walking, you can't actually identify something. Or you might say, meet Tashi, and you go and you shake hands with him. Well, okay, your hand touched Tashi's hand, but you say, I met Tashi. Well, is Tashi his hand? No, that's a part of him, and we designate independence upon that collection of parts. This person as Tashi, for example. And so too, we dependently designate upon this basis of designation of the person. There is consciousness as well, but it's not as though the person is that clear and knowing nature of mind, but rather, again, if we just have a collection of parts, it is on that basis of designation that we then say, oh, that is the person. And here, when it comes to this kind of mode of investigation, again, we can't have something within within the sort of body or mind as it has gone through, and it is also not the case that the person is all of them together. So as this is explained as well in Chandrakirti's entry to the middle way, just the collection of something is not like you could have, for example, I mean, they used to use a chariot. We more often use like a plane or something. If you have just the collection of the parts, but they're not actually put together, we wouldn't say that that is that thing, right? It is the case that it needs to be in the proper arrangement. But then Chandrakirti adds on, well, it's not just the shape of those things. It is not the case that the thing can be identified as just kind of the arrangement or the shape either. This is another level of analysis that he adds. But it's also not the case that that the person could be something aside from that basis of designation, in the way that we have like right and left hands that are totally unrelated, or we have blue and yellow, or an ox and a cow. If it were the case that there was something entirely separate from the aggregates, we wouldn't be able to say things like, I'm sick, or I'm going here, I'm thinking that, because the I would be something that is entirely apart from, separate from those aggregates, and therefore it wouldn't be logical to say any of those things.
Oh yeah, that is so. Oh, that that comes out the come to Dubala, then a top of some shaku is. You rang when you not any year you could yomare sungura. Then a top of some sura. Not to Jiden Tanya Wangi in Jesungua. Since Jiden Tanya stood try and talk when you the Sigara. So could talk way Wangi Shapa. Tanya be Louis Wangi Shapa. Shoot him jet talk way thousand Sigda. Tobagi thousand city, Tobe part thousand summer to Grisio Marda. The Shikarin at Telekamba, the Consakarin, Teleken farming Tagado, 3,000 Tagal Chasha would say, Yima in the Tagal 치바쳐오래. 다게 직바쳐오래. 똑베 따섬 쇼탐제 똑베 따섬레스. 쇼탐제 똑베 왕게 샤바레스. 타니게 왕게 샤바레스. 대선자고 자와싱게디 샤고요래. 때네 딱바 잠레 차치 롱아세트 시고라. 어디 직바쳐. 다디 오마데 때디 직바르지레샤. 자주자지데로와. 기부 감준 되베서서 네 기부데 다 매르베스네 요래 감준 되발라 때네 딱 받점을 샤고래 해셔라 근데레레 제가 너는 라요 말에 대졸라 때네 봐 당에 따고도 어디 딱 받점 침바셔고래 디까디레스 우주점 비게전 유랑원에 요는 예요 랑원에 요 말. 그때네 딱 받점을 샤고래 해서 저와 생게도 샤고래 쓰고라 기부 감준 되발라 때네 딱 봐서고라 기부 감준 되베서 양다 마인스 양다바 주고 말에 돈담바 주고 말에 랑원에 주고 말에 랑완도 주고 말에 랑신지 주고 요 말에 소라 양다바 주고 민세 대신도 소라 지다와 대신 감내래래 양세 감 주고들 때네 딱바래 간사 랑완도 주고 요 말에 소나시 사추 멜롱 남걸 소바 감태서야 랑완도 주고 요 말에 세거라 풍부갈 때네 다 딱바 삼래 다 랑완도 요 말에 풍부레레레야 랑완도 다 쳐간가 찍버래 달리 잡아내시 강벌에 자나 다가르로 이동을 수를 자나라 이동을 자나라 가를 자나 지 초원에 지까지 지 초원마다 명다에 직장장실 명다에 요 말을 랑원도 주거지 어들 내 도와 대오마도 깨지깨지더라 기부 감정 대배서 양다 마인스 양다 버튼다 버투바 마인스 시다와 대신도서 감르르네야 네 간사데 라와도 매마도 소보데 라와도 요르베 심데 라와도 요르베서 어떤데 말다 소라 사금 추감 메가 룽가라 소보 소보 차셔 상마데 레레레레 라와도 주바 요 말에세 된다 다라 셰바나 셰초 탐절 봐 총바자고 그래 지달 켜게 다근 도시네 셰바 대신 꾼로 자르차와서데 네 되서 대신 감내레레 양 되지 양당이도 면서 어떻게 좋나 하는 데로 야
So here then again, everything is merely designated by thought, as it has said, and here the next verse, 81, is very similar in that it says, just as the person is not real due to being a composite of 6 constituents, so each constituent is not real due to being a composite. So here again, when we get at that all phenomena are merely designated again by names, the actual sounds that we give them, as well as thought. This negates their having the kind of autonomous, independent existence in the way that they appear to us. And we have to add the caveat that not everything that we think is established. So there is a difference there between being established by thought and actually according with the way that the sort of things function, and those things that we just think and imagine. But we also have to be satisfied with that level of being merely designated by conception or thought. If you're not satisfied and then try to go and search and find that thing, there is nothing findable there. There's no, again, self in that sense of that autonomous, independent existence. And so to a certain extent, we need to be satisfied with being merely designated by thought as being sufficient for existence. It's not existent from its own side. Here, as we establish with the person, that they don't, there's nothing that one can find within the aggregates that is that person. And so too, and here where it says, just as the person is not real, in the Tibetan, this is Yangdakpa, this it could be glossed as something that so is not real. Real would be synonymous with existing from its own side, or autonomously existing by means of its own characteristics and so forth. And so too, in the way that the person is not real, is not truly existent due to being something that is designated on the composite of 6 constituents, so too each of those constituents are not independently, inherently existent by their own right. And so all phenomena are the same. This is equally applicable to all phenomena, whether we are talking about a person or we are talking about a house or something that appears pleasant or something that appears unpleasant. So it is that although they appear to have that kind of existence, they don't exist in that way. And so each constituent, the earth, water, wind, fire, and so forth, also does not have that real existence, that existence in and of itself. And so, as we've quoted before, just as you understand the person to lack such a self, understand that in relation to all phenomena, or understand all phenomena likewise.
this. Tate Wamadira, Geshe Thabkhe, Tate Karisha Nambanga Ikune Sena Kansa de Ragumare, Sonza Kansa, Rangune Mabare, Tantamba Mabare, Rawanto Truba Mabare, Stishekdoa. Oh, take under this. Pumbu Ta means Pumbu Abude Ta, Chick Maris, Pumbunga de Tamaris, or Tatan, the Suji Pumbu Soy Pumudishin, the number ship Pumbunga de Tamaris. Pumbu Ta means Pumbu. Zena Sigoto, Kansa Ramune Yona, Takagre, Segura, Pumbunga de Tare Besana, Pumbunga Tandugan Yora, or Pumbunga de Tare Sishara. So good as some that saw than the show, there's a tare, Timadamar. Pumbunga de Tires now, Timandiris. And the Tamambut in the Kadiris, Tachilia, Sogo Taj, Semetas, Soa Taj, and Dushi Taj, and Disney. Number Shiba Taj, Tam, Medanga, Redura. Tadi Mambuta Grisa. Pumbu da means you got Pumbungavo de that's it. Sena Sura Tadi Sena, Ta Pumbule Nambangar Metes, Nambanga con the Sena, Tanzanga con the Sena Ragmares, Tanzanga Kakaresna, Pumbu da Kansa, and you would Chigmares or Chigmares. Chiginani Tadi Dopa Chiksera, Chiksetter. Dokpa chik dang o chik sa chi ora pesen. Dokpa chik sina kora chik rang kare ne tito kanga chikpa dirwa. Basura chik to ne chik tokpe kyaba chik gada tende ko kaga chiya mewa tere. Tokpe yudu kaga dhruya me na. Basura chik re diwara. Tokpe yudu kaga dhruya yu na. Mene tade re diwara. Tokpa kate na sokpo se Onge Lu di Tokpe Yutun do Mado, Soa di Medua, Tokon Doba Tadere, Sorwa Sidian, Dushi da number Sheba Tozo Medua, Doba Tadere, Tokpe Yudu Soso Sucha Dona, till Doba Tadesira, Timare Tires, Tokpagi, Doba Tema is Sevekone, Jusigra, Tokpa de Yula Jutus and Tema is Sevekone. Kurasamurai ta o timare tires chiksu toche tura o tindu kasa tel dokpa tokbe yudu soso kaga ro do dokpa ta dere tokbe yudu chikto de te to kyab to dokpa chire do yara kaga ro mena o tindu basa o chigine kyo kare oresena shaya tsena ta pumbu da nambanga yo mares pumbu da kansa ge ta chig mindese 아니 미다바르 타와다 시인의 치르바도 저렇게 다겨라 님도 다다 분이 치이나 근데 풍부 미다반 주로데 하고도 소분 주도데 뱀 주도데 저선 주도도 그 다된 주로에 딱 같이 부랑어 있으거라 아니 때간데스케라 풍부가데 다이나 네 소부데 다이네 때 주도도 샘 주도도 소한 주도도 시게 근데 다들 딱 말해만 소화서 치료받을 게 아니라 남발을 딱 박히길래 그래요 말아. 저는 저나 풍부 남방을 매대 풍부다 간사게 다 찍마인데 간사 찍마인데 다 미다버 타와서. 근데 미다버는데 우리 치료받을 게 아니라 두말 타와서 풍부가 여번에 다래 나요. 간사실 당아요 버는데라. 대 가가 셔라 소부대 다래 지 심대 다래 군입에 가가라 근데 좋아 다래 너 건조 다래 나제 다래 Tisangma Taridu, Tama Mushavichagra, Tama Mutawashigara. Nambanga Mede, Pumbuda Gansagita, Chigmindi, Takbar Tawata, Tumar Tawata, Tenik Jawatamba Miteba, Tawala Soba Change Udesigara. Twitter Jawatamba Sepina Sobuda Chavina, Joangama de Co, Tatu Silkena, Tatu Sobura. Tanda sosu mi luli kiri mi sabura dara. Ani tadige tesi tete na te juru se chaya yorwa. Tesi tandu jure sha ta tanda nga mi re sha se tinde chaya yorde. Ngeme nge sobude tande sobude kien jawa yo mara. Ani nga ngeme sobude li samtane tande sobude da ko nga nyema tinde chili ta tinde kyusha se chaya yo marwa. Pe kagara kuni kyunchi panche chiki durni yoyate marwa. O te tabu shayakira. Ini ani kawala so. Mami bechik. Tene pumbu te me yangara wa mahisera. Pumbu me vaje ta kora kyang chipu kyang sobol te je del me go ba chi te yung ma de sera. Pumbu me ba mebe chanyi chendo tawani yoshi. Pumbu menge sobo menge ta yogo te yung ma de sera. Tene 다다 풍부 신다다 되네. nga shegora. 다다 풍부 니데 메신다르. 메다 신데 신시기도. 데 신데 테마르 가서 지나 칠로 용게 신도 줄세요 말다. 내가 좀 메파르잖아. 자가도 바네 신 그게 신동 첨부터 신동 첨부터 메파르시 샤그래. 미가 그 메트로야래. 미쪽부터 봐. 줘야 돼. 그 신고란 마트도 잡아대래. 들으시거라. 신다 매니 오지 버리다도 되게 신고란 마버도 되거라. 저기 전에 신고나 배서서는 매서더라. 들으시거라. 제지 되어라. 뭐 되어라. 가만둬서. 야, 그래.
Again, di dosen Dr. Pungbo de Karshon Kyashuk tar tembamin. Di dosen.
배를 집어다 다단다 용구다. 나도 스파 락션에 되거라. 아데 풍불라 가션라 캐슈던 번나 셔땡기 말에 풍부대 달라 때때 번나 셔땡기 말에 이거 자주라. 직 말에서라. 배뭐 셔땡데 말에서. 다던다 디나 시잖아. 풍미세 다데 풍부 말에서라 풍미. 풍불레 셔도 배뭐 타데서네 요 말에서. 텔라 풍미세 다들 풍부 때문에 생기 때문에 펠레트날이야 신도루나 셔요 말에서라. 네 풍부들 다 대신수 때문에 요 말에서. 네 네바 가 소발할 때네 네 때부터 풍미 풍부레세메 텔라 풍미 때문에 디시바 풍대면서 디나시라 이리가 되셔도 풍부란 데베치기요 말에서라. 다데 풍부란 데베치기요 말에. 데베치기 메가 가서 뭐 집어 데베치네 요 말은 뭐 타데 데베치네 요 말에서라. 셴나 낭den서도 대신리야 방하던 데버레스나 대신리야 못하던 데버레스나 뭐 타데라. 대신랑 고던 데버레 수던 데버레스 뭐 집어가 데버시고라. 어디 뭐 진 데버들 니 쳐셔요라. 그래서 내가 그래서 어디 지교산
Yeah. Okay, so then here in verse 82, we get into refuting an inherently existent person by way of the five sort of modes of analysis. And so this reads, the aggregates are not the self, nor do they exist in the self, nor is the self in the aggregates, but without them, the self cannot exist. And the self and the aggregates are not mixed like fire and fuel. Therefore, how could the self exist? So here we'll go through these four this five-fold analysis, beginning with the first assertion that the aggregates are not the self. So there are those who would assert that the aggregates are the self. Now here, the first problem that would arise with that is that the aggregates are multiple, whereas we have a single kind of a self. So would you then have multiple selves? Because things like form, feeling, our discrimination, consciousness, and karmic formations, these are not the same one thing, right? So here, if we assert that the self is the aggregate, then the self, we would have the problem that the self would become multiple. Now here, when we search for the self in these five ways, looking at the commentary by Gyaltsab as well, the self and the aggregates are not one, because first it would follow that the self would therefore become impermanent. So here, this is something that again is refuting the idea of some non-Buddhists, particularly that would assert that there is a permanent, unitary, autonomous self. And it is clear that our aggregates are impermanent. So if the self is the same as the aggregates, then the self would become impermanent, would have to be impermanent. And so too, when it comes to this, like understanding it as if the self were the aggregates, so too it would follow that the self would become multiple. And again, this is important when we look at it in terms of something being a single conceptual isolate. Here is how I'm going to translate that. So when it comes to how we think about things, and this word dokpa is really like the opposite of something, the opposite of its opposite, and so that there is only a single conceptual isolate. So when we think about like if we think form, there's no way that consciousness can arise in our mind. That thing is a single sort of conceptual isolate. There's nothing else that can arise, and so it cannot be the case that the self and our aggregates are of a single conceptual isolate. We again, going to the other sort of faults that have arisen here, if it were the case that the aggregates were the self would become impermanent, and that is a problematic assertion as well. The self would become multiple, and it would also, as it explains here, there would be the fault that it would not be reasonable to remember past lives. So again, if it were the case that the aggregates of this life were the I, were the self, then we couldn't remember, say if in a past life we had been born as an animal, like a horse or something, to have any sort of memory of that body as a horse. In the case that we are now in this form as a human, there's been a cutting of that continuity. There can't be within a single sort of continuum of form that one we have changed from the kind of form that we had in a previous life to the form that we have now. And so you wouldn't be able to recall those other lives in which you had a different sort of a form. And so then a little bit skipping ahead is recognizing that here, and we'll get to the sections on nor do they exist in the self. So the aggregates don't exist in the self, nor is the self in the aggregates. So this way of looking at them is support and supported, but we're going to skip ahead to, and the self and the aggregates are not mixed like fire and fuel. So here it really says like fire and wood, but we need to think about it in that context when like in India or something, they're burning a big piece of wood such that that wood is really like on fire. It seems like the wood, the fire and the fuel are kind of mixed together such that when the fuel runs out, the fire will run out as well. And this is not the way in which our aggregates and self exist, like sort of mixed together in this way that the self is almost something ineffable. We can't describe it, but is mixed with that self. That is not the way in which these appear. And nor, too, does it have again, this sort of relationship of either possession or support. It's not as though the self is somehow the support for the aggregates, or the aggregates are the support for the self, in the way that you would have like a plate that is supporting fruit, that they are of somehow different essences but have that kind of relationship. And nor is there a kind of relationship of possession. And the kind of relationship of possession can be one where they're of the same nature or of a different nature. Like when we say, oh, Devadatta has a cow, or Devadatta has a car, that's something that is separate, apart, different from him, and this indicates this kind of possession or ownership, as opposed to, oh, Devadatta has a hand, or Devadatta has a head, where it's part of the same essence. The self and the aggregates do not have such a relationship of either this supported and supporter and supported, or possessor and possessed thing, in either of those, whether it's of the same essence or a different essence.
Oh, yeah. That gives you some data, Sholoka. Oh, take our sigdosena. And Juan some Satan chick my in this, such a melon Juan she ora. Tina ne Sadabu chick this ora. Juan Shanda, Chu me long down, chick my race ora. Jungsum some me, so the some means. Juan some bute, Satan, Sai Juan the chick my race ora. Chick in a can carry orasana. And it's Chu me longi, Chachi Chava Sama the chick ora. Sagene, Sekparchevada, Yorchebala Soba, Tizu, Lunguchavada, May Chavada, Chui Chavala Soba, Ganga Chipaing Chadura, Salatan, Tandugura, or Juan some Sada Chigma Rese, Garesan Chigina, Salan Juan some Gitseni, Samatavandu, Yevatavandu. And it's any time I did do the Sachimelo Sashi Tabas, Yashi Yoa, Sashi Segba Sarah, Yora, Strug each other, Tezukanga Sachibulia, Yavatagris Yora, Tindido. Josum Sami, Dilla means at the Rata, Sachim. San de la Joasum, Franchinji Trubesi, Tembaya Mares, Yora, and Sumbutella. Sumbu de la Temba Mila se San de la Johansum Temba Mari Johansum de Salapa Ranshin Tribesi Temba Maise. Sumbu de la Nicare Sumbu de la de Temba Mila Sadi Su Temba Marise. Sumbu de da Mebaria Sadi Neba Maise. Tatunda Tunzen Shira Chishegua Chig Maise Tunzen Shisha. Sumbuteda Mebaran, Saneto Mares. Joanam Janchuchase, Netash into Zumbares or Tembatuba Mares. Johansitan, the church damishegua, the Tama the concert, the church damage. Shula Soba Reran, Tuition to number Shirichana Menibese. That's Sadit under Joan Sumbuteda Chick Mares, Chichaswa, or Tinashin and Joan Samali Shishi. Share or a tissue and any ranking Matuba to good days or this was Joanam Church answer. Dash into started Chibutsumbasan. Sumba in Batase, Tembatu Mare, Chumbatu with this, Tembatu Mares. And a chula so what station to number Shirichana, many bitches or the Tindu. Tunda Kasore, Juan Sumbu Samare, started Chicharo Tinashi, and he Sati Chudi Juan Shanti Maris, made in Juan Shanti Maris, Tilice, Sumbachani, Shishi Chana, Ranshinji Matuba, Ranshinji Matuba Tubiora. Tunduda, Jun Sami, yeah.
So then, turning next to verse 83, and this is going into the explanation of the selflessness of phenomena. Here, beginning with looking at the various elements. And so here, this is first establishing that they are not inherently existent as either one or many. So, the other three elements are not earth, nor are they in earth, nor is the earth in them, but without them the earth cannot exist. Such is also the case for each of the other elements. Therefore, as with the self, the elements are unreal. And so here, it is not the case that the three other elements, as in water, fire, and wind, are earth. They are not the same. If it were the case that all of the other three elements were the same as earth, then it would follow that Earth would be complete with the kind of characteristics of those other elements. And so obviously that is not the case. Earth has the ability to, again, be sort of have hardness and support. And wind has that sort of motility, and water has that cohesion, and fire has that ripening heat kind of element, nature. Its nature is characterized by being hot and burning and so forth. And so all of the kind of functions or characteristics of the other elements would have to apply to Earth, but that is not the case. That is not how these exist. And so, too, it isn't the case that the Earth element is like the support for the other elements, nor is it the case that the earth exists supported by the other elements, nor is the earth in those other elements. So again, there is no sort of relationship of being the support and the supported between an inherently existent earth and the inherently existent other elements. And then, nor is it the case that Earth could exist without those other elements. They are interdependent. So here there are four modes of investigation and analysis that lead us to an understanding that the subject, these elements, it follows that they are like the self, and here that's referring to the self of persons, because again, we've moved to talking about the selflessness of phenomena, that like that self of persons they are false, because when it comes to finding each of these through the four sort of methods of analysis that were presented above, each of them, water and so forth, can't be found. There isn't any inherently existing earth element or any of the other elements. So it's not as though they exist inherently as one thing or in this kind of inherent relationship of support and supported, but nor is it the case that each one can exist independently, inherently separate from the others. And so therefore, like the self of the persons, one should recognize them as being false, as not being established as inherently existent.
뭐야, 또 접시더라. 근데 가서도 손 매봐. 레레 매서 다 중앙 숨 되시거라. 지금이 봐야 숨 매도서. 대나산 중앙은 랑신지 매대서. 중앙 레레 전에 랑신지 주바요 말에. 와. 사주 멜로남 숨 매바르로 매. 숨데 매네 레레 장발이 내도 말에서라. ene chik me ba ya tena ne juwe shi na ne chik me ne shanda sumbu de ne tu ma re se ta soba sa to to ro chi na ne ti kang ga ju ha shi ga de ga she ga ra ta ta de mi ki ya tene chik me ba ya sum me be se se o ti ba do ti re sum me ba ne re re ju ha sum ga me na rang shi ji tu me ne re re ne rang shi tu ba ma re 중앙지 그런시 또 매나야 송바란시 또 용구마를 세르치 뒤지셔도 숨이 바네레레메 지금이 바야 숨메도 어디지람나.
So then turning to verse 84, it then reads, Earth, water, fire, and wind are each not inherently existent, since each one does not exist without the other three, and the other three do not exist without each one. So here, therefore, this is establishing that the elements, earth and so forth, are not inherently existent, as it has explained here, that each of them is not established by means of their own essence or their own nature. And so here, as it is the case, whatever of these various elements, earth, water, fire, wind, when one does not exist, or sorry, when each of them is established to not be existent by means of its own nature, own characteristics, it's not the case. Earth, water, fire, and wind. Without the other three, like they can't exist individually as individuals. And if one is not existent as an inherently existent individual, then it cannot be the case that there are all three existent as inherently existent individuals. So here again, since each one does not exist without the other three, in the absence of the others, one can't have a sort of solitary, isolated, independent existence, then the other three do not exist without each one. So since that is the case, that they can't individually exist as a single one, that then so even in, like, say, a clump of earth, all four elements are present within that.
뭐야 다들 다 자주 장하더라 중앙 두바랑 신지 매버 두고도 중앙 두바 저는 가서 걔들 숨매 레레 매서 중앙 숨부대랑 신 매나니 레레 와더랑 신 우마레세 지금에 바량한테나 지금 신지 두바 매나 숨부대 랑시 두바 우마레세 소소 여바 마이들 중앙 소소소 랑시 두바 요마레 중앙 좀 두바대 랑시 두바 요마레세 소소랑신 소소 여바 마이데 지단 드바께 버려서 소소랑신 여바 매발이야 드바데 조좀 조실라서 드바데 랑시 주바 칼아요데 용마레스로 야 텔레스라나 비스
So then turning to 85, verse 85, this is then establishing that because of the fact that these are contingent, are dependent, the aggregation of these various elements is also not inherently established. That because they are dependent or contingent, that is in direct opposition to their having some kind of inherent establishment. And so it reads then in 85, that if each one does not exist without the other three, and the other three do not exist without each one, then they individually do not essentially exist. So how could they arise as a compound? So here, if the individual elements don't have inherent existence, then it's impossible for there to be a compound of them, or a derivative from them, something that is compounded of those elements that has that kind of inherent existence, since it is the case that they individually lack that sort of essential existence or inherent existence.
뭐야 단데르다 가서래 겨주디라 어디 가르쳐도 선에 같이 쪄바시고도 들려려도 소소랑게 뭐에 예베서 드바랑 신기도 좋은 드바데랑 신기도 요래서 같이나 용게 좋은 레레레라데랑 신기베 실수도 뭐뭐 저술랍게 와라 신나서 다들 발레자도 네네 가르쳐도서는 좋은 숨게 다니 장게 büyüşün mebarı, önde sosoruna yöna, büyüşün mebarı, meçi mese. Cuma sosoruna şey gituba yöna, ne mendacı na yöna ko, mi şimdi büyüşünde mena ya, ne meyo çok resa, sosoruna şey yöna, mekora şey yöna sonra, rangşin yöna, ne büyüşünle tenko yakıyor marısı böyle. O kede sosoruna yöna, büyüşün mebarı. büyüşün mebara meçi mese büyüşün mena meyo şor Kishin said the pay bar dengue, metangochi, chetenge chiwara, or telesigua. And then Yodan Todan Tubatan, Shudan Meda Luntishi, or Tisnashi, Yoa Lungdan, Ra, Toba Satan, Tuba Cheba Chudan, or Tezutama Ranshinji of Maresora. Soso Ranshinji of Maina, Duba Ranshinji of Marese. And then such a menu de Ranshinji of Martes, and that's what they are Ranshinji of Mares, Tituda. Yeah. Can do it.
So here then it also is refuting an idea that is brought by the kind of realists that would say that there is an inherently existent kind of aggregation or compound of these various elements because they each individually exist inherently in their own right. And so here, as it says then in 86, this is kind of a rejoinder that is put forth by the opponent where they say, if each element exists on its own, then why wouldn't fire occur without fuel? Likewise, why wouldn't there be water, wind, and earth without coherence, motility, and hardness? So here, again, if it is the case that each of these elements exists like inherently in and of its own right, then it should be the case that you could have, for example, fire without fuel, without the kind of basis upon which it is consuming or acting as fire, that you could have a fire in the absence of those characteristics of it being hot and burning and so forth. And so too, if that were the case, that there is this kind of inherently existent fire that exists on its own, again, then you would have to have the occurrence of, say, fire without fuel. And likewise, there would have to be water without coherence, wind without motility, and earth without hardness. These things would have to exist in and of themselves, actually even independent of their kind of characteristics or functions.
Oh, yeah, that is to just also.
Oh. So we will stop there for today as we are out of time.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Rinpoche. You've given us a lot to think about. And thank you, Katrina, for your beautiful translation. Just a reminder, we're meeting next Tuesday instead of Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific. And with just 2 weeks left of these teachings for this series, there's information in the chat box about offerings of gratitude. So we'll finish with some dedications.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chinrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
Oh, yeah. But,
도체낭이야.
oh, yeah. Oh, this.